Welcome to the sideboard, and we've got a great deck for you today. I'm your host, Kilo, and today we're going to be covering green-black DinoConstrictor. I know green-black DinoConstrictor makes okay, but this deck is serious. It's a very good little deck. A lot of people are really wanting to make use out of some of the dinosaurs. Granted, this deck is not really using a lot of the dinosaurs everyone wants to use, like Carnage Tyrant, and there might actually be a location in this deck for Carnage Tyrant or two, but for the main board, this deck, we're just going to stop at 5. We're topping out at 5. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is very similar to a deck that was covered by Eric Flowacek on Channel Fireball. I'll throw a link in the description and below to his list. He ran a list with 4 Verdurous Gearhulks, but then again, his list did arise before the arise of the Blue-Black Pirates, and we just needed the Sky Sovereign Console flagship main board. There's a couple other changes that we've made to the list that kind of update it to be competitive in certain matchups. Most of those changes were done in the sideboard though, and for the most part the main board has remained intact. So we'll just go ahead and go over the deck here. It does run far fewer lands than most other decks that you would normally see. This deck only runs 23 lands, whereas decks like Teamer Energy run 21, 22 lands and 4 attune with ethers, putting them somewhere around 25 to 26 virtual lands if you account for the fact that attune is a virtual tap land. You can you're definitely going to feel the bite, and when playing the deck you do feel the bite of RNG from time to time. Not getting those lands is just definitely a bad feeling, and no one likes to play Magic like that. So any other changes going forward, maybe adding the 24th land, but I don't really see that. One other change that personally, after playing it, and we just finished a couple matches, after playing it, I think one of the biggest changes I would make would be remove a forest and a swamp for 2 Field of Ruin. One of the things that I noticed when playing is there are a lot of Search for Azcanta decks out there. A lot of decks running Search for Azcanta, and that land, when it flips, is extremely broken. So just having a way to deal with those is absolutely phenomenal. So there's not a lot of interaction in our land base. Yes, I believe the deck could afford 1 or 2 if near deadlands or something like that, just to give it a little extra. In those games where you're coming out aggro, you're going to be bigger and you're going to have a good life total anyway. So if near deadlands, I don't actually believe would hurt the deck a whole lot. I haven't put any in here, but I definitely think that is a card that is worth looking at. For the land base though, it does run, other than the basics, it runs 2 Foul Orchards. I've put 2 Field of Ruin in here. It runs 2 Evolving Wilds, which helps with the Fatal Push, and then just 4 Blooming Marshes to top off the non-basics. Everything else is just, forest and swamps. Moving on into the removal package here. The deck has 4 Fatal Push. It has 2 Vraska's Contempt and 2 Savage Stomp. Also, if you consider a combat trick as a removal piece, you could consider Blossoming Defense, but this deck works as both pseudo removal and pseudo counter. So this card is really good. I said deck. This card works as like pseudo counter to counter their kill spells and things like that, and it also could be pseudo removal in the event of a trade. So just a really versatile card to have in our deck. But one of the pieces of removal I would really like to talk about, because everyone's really familiar with Vraska's Contempt and Fatal Push, but Savage Stomp, a new card from Ixalan that we're actually getting to use a little bit here. Now, I do want to point out that unlike most of the other dinosaur synergies, for this card to get its benefit, it has to actually target a dinosaur. So if you are targeting your Winding Constrictor and their creature, you will have to pay full price for this card. However, if you do have one of your dinos out, then this was a 1 mana Dromoka's Command with both of the good fight effects. That is a really, really good card. I just wish that we had a few cheaper dinosaurs to tack onto it that were relevant. That being said, it is still a very good card, and when you combined it with cards like Winding Constrictor, you end up with an extremely broken fight mechanic that will normally pay off for you exponentially. Heaven forbid you have a Winding Constrictor and you get to use it for 1 mana on something like a Ripjaw Raptor. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's go back to the 2-drops here. Now, this deck mainly works with 2 packages. Those packages, well, I guess you could say 3 packages. The aggro style removal package that you see here, 4 Fatal Push and 2 Vraska's Contempt, has become pretty standard here in Ixalan as removal main board. Now, this does have a couple more copies and a couple counters. You can consider these as your utility spells, but this package is pretty straightforward, and you'll see these 6 cards in quite a few decks. You're starting to see Kitesail Freebooter be put into more of the aggro decks that run this package. So I'm going to consider Kitesail Freebooter as part of the removal package for these aggro decks. Kitesail Freebooter is just an absolutely phenomenal card. If you're able to stop, say, a turn 1 play with a Fatal Push or something along those lines, following that up with a Kitesail Freebooter to remove any of their other possible removal, or a Chandra or something along those lines, really puts them off of their removal. Now, like I just said about the removal package, most decks are only running about 6 pieces of removal, maybe a couple other key cards that could or could not remove, or maybe even counter as their utility cards, but most are only running 6 mainboard pieces of removal. Therefore, if you can grab a hold of one of those key pieces with a Kitesail Freebooter, you're really going to put yourself miles ahead, and it'll be a long time before they get a piece of removal that they can remove the Kitesail with, and which will then get them back their other piece of removal. And if it is a key piece that only works well in the early game, say you're on the play and you take a Censor, by the time they actually get something like a Censor back, it may no longer be relevant, meaning Kitesail has just completely did its job and you have gotten maximum value out of that. Therefore, Kitesail Freebooter, absolutely phenomenal card. Not going to mention the fact that, well, we are going to mention the fact that the flying really helps get in that extra ping damage. Also, on turn 2 against red deck, you stop Bomat Courier from swinging right here. If you took a key piece of removal, they've got no more removal left. Bomat Courier cannot swing unless they pull their Earthshaker Kendra or some other way to force it to not block. That is a very, very good interaction. Moving on down, we'll go ahead and jump into the next package. I don't actually want to cover these in this deck in per se a curve, more as this deck is a combination of packages that work extremely well together. So we'll go over those packages, and then we'll so I guess if the packages were pieced together, I would say they would look something along these lines: land, removal, counters, dinos, and then utility. So for our counters, we start the counters package with the grandfather of counters here, Winding Constrictor. This snake is the heart of any good counters package in these colors. I would not run any type of counter deck that is green-black without snake. So 100% 4 of in this deck. Now, one of the best openings you can have on the play with a snake deck, assuming it doesn't get removed, is a Winding Constrictor into a Rishkar, giving you a 4/5 and a 4/4 body on the battlefield. This is an extremely effective turn 2 and turn 3. This curve is extremely strong and puts a lot of pressure on your opponent at that moment. There's not a lot of creatures that can be on the battlefield at that time that have the chance of profitably blocking the Winding Constrictor swinging in as a 4/5 on turn 3. Next, we move into one of the best late game mana sinks you will find in this deck, and probably one of the major reasons that Dinos was paired with the counter package. Now, it's clear that with looking at this deck that it was just packages put together, and the majority of the package that survived the counter package was because of Walking Ballista. The interaction between paying 4 mana to add 2 counters to Walking Ballista and then being able to do amazing things like remove those counters, ping your Ripjaw Raptor for 1 or 2, draw 2 cards. I don't think there's many Magic players that wouldn't pay 4 mana at the end of turn to draw 2 cards. This is a really, really good interaction, and it works extremely well. Now, we have another dinosaur here with the Ranging Raptors. Whenever you deal damage to this creature, you would actually be able to ramp 1 card forward. So, Ranging Raptors, also another good Enrage card to be hitting with the Walking Ballista. Moving on down the counters here from Walking Ballista, we all know that it's just a great late game mana sink, early game removal card. Just a really, really good card. The top of our curve here, and one of the best cards we can have with a Winding Constrictor is Verdurous Gearhulk. Heaven forbid you have Winding Constrictor and 3 other bodies on the battlefield and you give each of them a +1/1 counter. Now, Verdurous Gearhulk is just a phenomenal card, and I get the understanding of running 4 of this, but with the approach of the flyers and things of that nature, the Sky Sovereign Console flagship seem to be coming into the main deck more often than not, so we did go ahead and bring that to the main. Let's go ahead and cover all of the dinosaurs really quick. We briefly touched about them in the Walking Ballista segment, but Deathcore Scavenger is an absolutely terrific dinosaur. Now, unlike some of the other decks, we're going to put up some really large bodies really quick, so we're not as worried about taking that early damage from decks such as like Red Deck and things like that. By turn 4, we normally have a body down that can almost block Hazard. So at that point, we're not very far away from being able to create a body that can block Hazard. So in the matchups that I had against Red Deck, it became kind of mute that I could just outgrow them. It was just not a real issue. There were a few sideboard cards that came in clutch, but we'll talk about those in a moment. But Deathgorge Scavenger, the ability to eat a creature that you have already killed and then gain 2 life just upon entering the battlefield, absolutely amazing. Eating a Kenra out of the battlefield, out of the graveyard, gaining that 2 life back feels great. I promise you, try it, you'll love it. We did speak about the Ranging Raptors. It's a nice little 3-drop, goes really well with our curve. If you can 2-drop a Walking Ballista into a turn 3 Ranging Raptors, worst case scenario, you chump block, and if you do not kill their dude, you can actually just ping yourself with the Walking Ballista, have a 5th mana on turn 4, assuming you had the 4th mana. But then on turn 4, have 5 mana to put some more creatures back onto the battlefield here. We did talk a little bit about our utility slot. Oh, sorry. I forgot the main reason to be in dinosaurs. Ripjaw Raptor. One of the entire reasons to even be running this deck is because of the interaction between Walking Ballista and Ripjaw Raptor. Ripjaw Raptor and Walking Ballista work absolutely great together. Many times have I been able to just draw 2 and 3 cards at the end of turn for a very low amount of mana. You have a couple points saved up on your Walking Ballista, but at that time it's also a little bit of a win more. However, in points where you reach board stalls where your creatures are sitting there staring at their creatures, and it will happen considering you'll both have very large creatures, Walking Ballista really pushes the envelope there. with allowing you to end of their turn, ping your own Ripjaw Raptor, put more counters on your Walking Ballista, just keep growing things. It gets a little out of hand and you draw a lot of cards. It is just really good, especially after you've pinged your Ranging Raptors a few times, got some of that extra mana down. If you get into the point of paying 4 mana every turn for Winding Constrictor to do the Enrage thing in the board stall states, you will come ahead because it'll only take 1 or 2 turns to the point where you can put 4 counters per turn on your Walking Ballista, getting 4 Enrage triggers, drawing more cards, getting to more Winding Constrictors, where at that point you start putting 6, 8 counters per turn onto your Walking Ballista. You're not far at that point from just machine gunning your opponent down without ever attacking. Very good interaction. I absolutely love the interaction between Walking Ballista and Ripjaw Raptor and Winding Constrictor. Having those 3 cards together is what makes this deck, and pretty much everything else in this deck is built to support that interaction. We do have the Savage Stomp, again, putting 2+1/1 counters on a dude and then fighting it for the Enrage trigger. Absolutely terrific. Great interaction. Pseudo counter in the Blossoming Defense, or the nice interaction with a fight mechanic if you want to trade in a fight. Sometimes this will really help you when they put a couple bodies in front of a Ripjaw Raptor because they know they just have to be done with this card. A Blossoming Defense works really good as a combat trick with that one. Last card in the main deck is the Sky Sovereign Consul Flagship. Now this card is just absolutely necessary with the rise of pirates. Maybe if there are less flyers in the main board, we could move off of that a little bit. But this card's really good at dealing with planeswalkers. Just the fact that it comes down will deal 3 damage to something like a Vraska, and then at that point they would need to negative the Vraska to kill it. If they did play Vraska, they neg to kill, say, Ripjaw Raptor. This card comes down, finishes that off. It's really good at dealing with Chandras and such. The 6/5 body is extremely relevant when it comes time to start closing games out. Those board stall states that we've spoke about that do happen with this deck, the Sky Sovereign Consul Flagship just really pushes the envelope on that, really helps you win those states. So moving one to the main board was definitely something that was worth looking at here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboard now. We've got a really good sideboard for you here. We tried to keep everything as relevant as possible, but yet there's certain matchups that we just need to guarantee that we win, and one of those is the control matchup. So there are a lot of cards here versus the control matchup. Duress, just absolutely phenomenal sideboard tech. I wouldn't really put it main board because, I mean, it has a probability of whiffing main board, but definitely you want this in the sideboard. Take those fatal pushes out against a blue-white approach deck, bring in your Duresses, go on from there. Aether Sphere Harvester, really good card as far as gaining life. It's also the only source of energy in the deck. I will say that if you have the Winding Constrictor down, that when you play this you'll get 3 energy from it, so you could activate the lifelink up to 3 times, giving you up to 9 life gain per Aether Sphere Harvester. Heaven forbid you find the other. That is a lot of life compared with or paired with things like Deathgorge Scavenger and such. Moving on down, we do have a couple Life Crafters Bestiary. There's just a couple decks that you cannot rely on Ripjaw Raptor to allow you to draw. Ripjaw Raptor will let you draw, but there's some decks that just have ample ways of dealing with him. And if they can just get rid of him, in most situations you will draw a card for them getting rid of him, but if you do not get to do so, cards like Lifecrafter's Bestiary are absolutely terrific, and it does not have to be a green creature. Someone had said something about, but you don't have that many green creatures. Any creature, you just need to pay a green mana to be able to draw a card. Not to mention, at the beginning of absolutely every upkeep, you get to scry 1. Now, that's pretty much what the front of Search for Azcanta does, only it allows you to throw them in the graveyard instead on the bottom of your library. So a guaranteed scry 1 every turn is not a bad card. It will let you filter through those draws and hopefully just keep drawing gas. You're looking for creatures after you get this down so that you can just keep playing creatures and keep pushing the pressure against those control decks. We do have 26 creatures, 11 others, and 23 lands. So 26 creatures, Lifecrafter's Bestiary, absolutely great card. Do remember, if you do bring it in though, bring it in when you're on the aggro plan. You're wanting to just continuously keep putting down bodies. That is what this card is for, in my opinion. Yes, you're drawing cards, but those cards that you're drawing, you're really hoping that they're creatures. So don't take too many creatures out of your deck if you do bring this in. Moving on up to the 4-drop here, we're running 2 Gonti, Lord of Luxury. A lot of you know about this card. Gonti is just absolutely phenomenal. The fact that he has Death Touch puts cards like Carnage Tyrant and Blistering Hydra on the puts the brakes on them, so you know they're not swinging in with a Death Touch creature on your side of the battlefield. Moving on down, Yahini's Expertise, another just absolutely terrific board sweeper against some of those smaller decks. You're not targeting. It doesn't matter if they're indestructible or not. So a lot of those decks run Hero's Intervention, and that does nothing to save them from Yahini's Expertise. Another quick introduction, I would like to talk about Gonti. There's not a lot of ways to beat the blue-white control deck or the blue-white approach deck other than sacking a Field of Ruin to shuffle it away once it's gone, grabbing a Duress and just getting it out of their hand. But Gonti, if you get lucky, you can Gonti into their approach when they put it on their library, and sometimes that will allow you to just take it away from them. So it is an option that you have. We do have a third Vraska's Contempt because in the red deck matchup or the teamer matchup, this is an extremely good card. You need to be able to kill that Glorybringer on the main phase before he gets to attack. Vraska's Contempt will give you that ability. Also letting you gain 2 life, which is very relevant in most situations. Another thing is this deals with Hazoret, Chandra, Vraska, any of the Planeswalkers, any of the gods. Not many of the gods are actually seeing much play. Oketra is showing up a little bit in the tokens deck. You have a few Ronus as fringe copies in some of the teamer decks. Vraska's Contempt, just absolutely great card. And let's mention the number 1 reason you have this card in your deck. If you do not exile the Scarab God, you lose. Vraska's Contempt is not a cuttable card. If you let them untap with a Scarab God, your graveyard is going to be stocked with absolutely everything that deck could ever want. Do not let them have a Scarab God. Moving on in, we do have a Liliana's Death Majesty. This is a really good card to get back like Gear Hulk's key pieces to you know, the fight. If you're needing a Winding Constrictor, something like that, this is a really good card. Also, sometimes just +1ing make a zombie, +1 make a zombie, just keep growing is the right effect. So going wide, +1 make a zombie, +1 make a zombie just becomes a really good play. Moving on over, I will say this though, because we're about to talk about Vraska here. Be very careful, +1 make a zombie if you really need to hit the Vraska. I milled both of mine the other day and it did not feel good. That being said, Vraska's +2 makes Pirates with Menace. Her -3 destroys a creature, artifact, or an enchantment of your target, and then creates a treasure token that you can sacrifice for mana. You can 6 mana, play this, destroy something, sack the token, fatal push something else, and you have extremely changed the board state. Or you can just +1 this 2 times, the next turn put your opponent at 0 and play Walking Ballista for 1. Or sorry, putting your opponent at 1, play Walking Ballista for 1, putting your opponent at 0. So, Vraska absolutely had to be in this deck. Any deck that is running Walking Ballista that is in green-black, there really should be Vraska in the deck somewhere. It is extremely good to just be like, bam, you're at 1 life. Take a point from Walking Ballista. Done. Game over. So, guys, this is the deck tech. This is the overview. We have played some games with it. The deck is extremely strong, but it does suffer from a little bit of RNG with the 23 lands. But once it starts going off, it's really, really hard to stop, and the threats are must answer. So they have to 1-for-1 you all the way down your curve. Otherwise, when you get to the other end of it, you will be too strong for almost any other deck out here. So just avoid 2-for-1s and just keep playing out your cards, to snag the 1-for-1, and in the end, you will more than likely come out on the top end because you just have must-answer threats. Your threats are extremely powerful. They do a lot of work, and all of the bodies are relevant. Even your Ranging Raptors has a 2/3 body, so it's just a really good card, or a really good deck. I hope you all enjoy it, and we'll catch you next time.